From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Trump delays 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada as part of a deal that will bring 10,000 troops from each country to their borders with the U.S.
We'll have reaction from the financial markets and insights from former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills, and we'll explore the geopolitical implications with Michael Allen at Beacon Global Strategies.
And Anna Ashton will also join us to explore the impact of tariffs on China, still set to go into effect at midnight, and the influence of Beijing after Panama promised to withdraw from Belt and Road. Thank you for joining us on this Monday evening. And what a Monday it has been, Joe, after the threat of tariffs over the weekend that were set to go into effect at midnight, at least in the case of our neighbors to the north and south. They have now been pulled back. Donald Trump confirming on Truth Social just moments ago what the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had already told us, which is that for 30 days, tariffs on Canada will be extended as they make pledges to secure the border and the flow of fentanyl over it.
Talking about security, as the White House earlier today had framed this as a drug war, not a trade war, Kaylee. Donald Trump writing, Canada has agreed to ensure we have a secure northern border and to finally end the deadly scourge of drugs like fentanyl that have been pouring into our country. This follows a phone call, of course, with the president of Mexico earlier today, Kaylee, that had a very similar result with threatened tariffs that will not take effect now tomorrow.
So we want to get into this now, this rapidly changing situation, and turn to Bloomberg's Dan Flatley, who covers national security for us. And Dan, that is how Donald Trump was framing this threat in the first place, was this is a national security issue. It's about protecting Americans from the flow of drugs and migrants. So where does this go next over the next 30 days?
Well, it's a great question, Kaylee. And I think that the idea of a 30-day pause really sort of introduces the notion that this could be paused again. So I think that, we sort of see Trump really using tariffs as leverage in negotiations, which is something that his Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, talked about in his confirmation hearing. He said that you'll see Trump using tariffs in leverage, as leverage in negotiations. You'll see him using tariffs to produce revenue that could go toward extending his tax cuts. And you could see tariffs being used to rebalance trade. So far, we haven't seen any of those other two categories satisfied with the most recent actions. So that is all still on the table. Trump has talked about tariffs on Europe. He's talked about, of course, tariffs on China, which were part of this weekend's actions. So all of that, stew of options is still in the mix. But right now, we definitely see him focusing on fentanyl and drug trafficking over the border. And it would seem that he has a victory to declare with this deal with Mexico and Canada at this point. Although we really don't know what's to come, what will happen after 30 days. And again, we still have those other two things on the table: revenue, which he needs for the tax cuts, and rebalancing trade, which was one of his campaign promises. So I don't think this is over by a long shot, but this is sort of the opening salvo in what's to come.
Well, some are wondering if Donald Trump ever planned to implement these tariffs, or if it really was just a kind of a short-term card to play here. But to your point, we still have China to deal with.
Right.
10% tariffs will go into effect tomorrow. Is that right?
That is correct, as we understand it at the moment. Of course, there is a deal with the other two countries that were included in this weekend's actions. So, stand by. We'll see what happens. Of course, there's been longstanding tariffs on China on the part of the U.S. now for several years, since the first Trump administration. So I'm not sure how that will enter into the calculus. And we do know that Trump did also today in the Oval Office talk about potentially a deal on TikTok, which is a Chinese-owned entity, as we understand it. So there's a lot of different elements to sort of be sorted out on that front.
We'll keep trying to figure our way through this with Dan Flatley's help. Dan, thank you so much. On the early edition of Balance of Power today, we spent some time with Jared Bernstein, the former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, the Biden administration. Here's what he had to say about the damage he framed that just the threat of tariffs could cause.
The damage is already done in terms of creating an uncertain environment that we know for a fact, empirically has been shown, trade uncertainty of this magnitude is associated with diminished investments. I don't think that these supply chains that you just asked about, where vehicles cross borders, both north and southern borders many times, are going to be reconstructed anytime soon.
And joining us now for more is Carla Hills. She's chair and CEO of Hills & Company, also former U.S. Trade Representative. She was the primary negotiator of the North American Free Trade Agreement and is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time on what has been an insane day, if we can describe it that way. You obviously are an advocate for free trade. Donald Trump had issues with NAFTA. His first administration then negotiated the USMCA. It seems now he is unsatisfied with that arrangement as well. What went wrong here? What are the issues that need to be resolved when it comes to trade in North America?
I don't think that you can say that there are issues that would make our president understand the full implications of the benefits of trade. You know, he talks about fentanyl and migration with Canada as a problem. Well, the statistics show that the fentanyl coming across the northern border is about 0.2%, and that the migration that is found was about 1.2%. So what he needs to do is to sit down and figure out what are his complaints with, for example, Canada. He's already agreed with President Sheinbaum of Mexico to have a pause for 30 days and work something out. But what is his plan? I think it's very confusing for our trade partners not to know what it is that he wants, and then talk about how they could accommodate that.
Well, apparently he wanted thousands of troops along both borders. We have that now, and we have a 1-month period of time, I guess, to think about this. Let's remove, to your point, Canada and Mexico for a moment. When Donald Trump talks about zeroing out our trade relationship, finding energy parity, is that something that Justin Trudeau can accomplish? What would it mean for our economies? No,
I think that we have to understand that Canada is an extremely valuable trading partner. It was just nudged out as position number 1 this past year by Mexico, but it's number 2. And millions of jobs are connected to our trade with Canada. In fact, we don't just trade with Canada and Mexico. We make things together. Right. General Motors, for example, this morning is talking about its investment is in Mexico, but what it sends here gets some of the parts here and goes up to Canada. I mean, we are making things together.
That's what Jared Bernstein was talking about. These vehicles cross the border multiple times throughout their assembly, compounding these tariffs to the point where, what, you can't buy any of these cars. Is that right?
No, and he says that the consumers don't pay for it. Excuse me, if I were to buy $100,000 worth of goods and they came into my port, I think it was Ed Gresser that pointed this out, and there was a 20% tariff. When I pick that up at the port, have to write a check for customs duties. And of course, I'm the purchaser. I pay the duty. I pay the cost of the goods. Those costs are assumed into the price of what I sell to you. Yeah. And so, and since most of our imports are things like shoes and clothing and refrigerators and the pieces for computers, it hits the lowest quintile most painfully.
Well, and the idea that this would impact specifically American consumers is what Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was attempting to speak to over this weekend when he was talking about the threat of tariffs and the retaliation Canada was prepared to respond with. Here's Trudeau.
First, I want to speak directly to Americans, our closest friends and neighbors. This is a choice that, yes, will harm Canadians, but beyond that, it will have real consequences for you, the American people.
So he's warning of consequences. You were as well, but President Trump contends that we don't actually need these goods from Canada. The idea that they can be replaced by other sources, including by American manufacturing. Where does that line of thinking go wrong?
It's impossible. Some of the largest imports we have come from Canada. Mm-hmm. They're invaluable. Even in the petroleum field, we ship, raw petroleum up, and goes back and forth across the border. Mm-hmm. Cars the same way. There's so many things that we do together and that create
jobs. And the U.S. can't do on its own. You're
Pardon?
saying the U.S. couldn't do that on its own.
No. If you were to find other suppliers, you would run into the same complaints that he's issuing to our number one and number two top trading partners, Mexico and Canada.
So what are companies supposed to do? You mentioned GM. We could mention any number of corporations impacted by this. Hold your breath for a month? Because you can't make a plan now, can you?
The uncertainty is enormous, and it has to be enormous also for our trading partners. And with reliability and trustworthiness have been just absolutely demolished.
It's great to have you with us in person.
Particularly, for example, these tariffs that we impose on Mexico violate not only the WTO, the World Trade Organization, that the president doesn't really applaud, but also the agreement, the U.S. Mexico and Canada agreement, I call it the MCA, it violates that. And my goodness, that was negotiated in his first term.
We'll see if the EU is next. Carla, thank you for being with us. Carla Hills, Chair CEO of Hills & Company, former U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador. We thank you for the insights today. Coming up, we'll have a look at the national security implications of President Trump's tariffs with Michael Allen, Managing Director and Partner at Beacon Global Strategies. He's next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and Radio.
The administration is operating with a much stronger position. So the ability of our trading partners to retaliate is quite low. And if the comments coming out of Mexico are correct, that's evidence as such that we're in a bargaining position. We're in a much stronger position. We're the big consumer. We're the big player.
That's Joe Lavorgna, the former chief economist, the White House National Economic Council, on the prospect of retaliatory action against the U.S. Joining us now here in Washington, Michael Allen, Managing Director and Partner at Beacon Global Strategies, a veteran of the National Security Council and the George W. Bush White House. Great to have you back, sir.
Thank you.
Can we say that tariffs work if they never go into effect?
I think Canada and Mexico had this in their pocket. Trump telegraphed the punch for many, many months. They knew that he wanted to do something on immigration and, of course, fentanyl. I think he tried to base both of those arguments, ground them in national security arguments rather than trade arguments. So crisis seemingly averted for the short term, but Trump was messaging very hard this weekend that he's going to take fentanyl and immigration very seriously.
Well, but are those actually national security issues to the extent that it justifies the use of IEEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act? It's traditionally sanctions related, not import tariffs.
You're right, and President Biden used them for sanctions against Russia the night that they went into Ukraine. So you're exactly right. It's not typically used for this kind of tariff activity. He did do it once when he was in office the first term, so he's used to going there. I think he thought it was a more straightforward, easier case to make, fewer findings they needed to make under the law. They could simply just determine that this was a threat to national security and enact them very quickly, and that's what they did.
We're spending a lot of time talking about Mexico and Canada because they are our neighbors, not necessarily considered anything other than good trade partners by most people you talk with. That may be a ball that's moving here. But there's China. with 10% tariffs set to take place tomorrow. Was the whole construct here, knowing that a weakened Canada and weakened Mexico could strengthen China, this very end result?
It could strengthen it. I think the Chinese know where they want to retaliate. They've, of course, telegraphed that they want to do something on critical minerals. They've even announced an investigation or two. And I think they'll re-tariff us back. So we'll have a bit of a trade war breaking out soon. There'll be retaliation. And I think this is where President Trump has to begin to really watch what the market reaction will be over a sustained basis. And ultimately, in red Republican districts across the country, if it feels like American workers are losing their jobs or people are getting furloughed because their supply chain doesn't work, I think the heat goes on to the president, and then he'll have to figure a way to back out of it.
Well, but that brings the notion of supply chains to this question around nearshoring, because that's what the U.S. has been trying to achieve, get more production out of China by bringing it closer to U.S. borders like, say, Mexico and Canada. What are all the companies who were nearshoring supposed to do with this kind of volatility around the countries at which they were told it would be safe to bring their supply chain?
You're right. I mean, it was get out of China, and then over time people went to Vietnam and went to Mexico, and now we're worried that there's been too much circumvention, at least in the Mexico case, of USMCA. And so that will be a top priority of the administration as they begin to renegotiate USMCA this calendar year. Of course, it's not up for renewal until next year around June, but this is a big issue. Circumvention is something they want to achieve via the renegotiations before USMCA is up.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio just got back from Panama, which agreed to withdraw from Belt and Road. Did the real news get snuffed out by this on-again, off-again tariff business?
I think so. This was a successful venture for the senator, the now secretary. He, of course, wants to make a priority out of Latin America. There have been nothing but commentary for years now about China's presence across the hemisphere. So I'm glad that he went there first. I'm glad he scored an early win. I think essentially that's what he's saying and the president are saying when they talk about the Panama Canal so frequently. It's about Chinese presence there. And so I think this is going to be a continued theme from Marco Rubio, who wants to elevate the Western Hemisphere up into the top issues facing the country.
Well, so when we consider that and the questions around Greenland as well, should we expect to see tariffs used as statecraft in these kind of diplomatic conversations? Where's the threat on tariffs on Panama and Greenland and Denmark? I guess we did get those at one point, didn't we, now that I'm saying it out loud?
Well, he wouldn't rule out tariffs or economic measures against Denmark. I had noticed he hasn't said he's going to go there yet. I think people have had, including me and others that are sort of in the national security community, weren't sure what to make of the Greenland thing. And now we realize that he's deadly serious. He wants that territory. I don't know what he'll settle for ultimately. There are other ideas out there short of an outright transfer to the United States. Not that Denmark's going to go there, but there's a lot to talk about when you talk about the Russian influence up in the Arctic Circle. And ultimately, if he's bringing more attention to that and puts more resources toward that area, I think that'll be a national security win.
How do sanctions against the EU help the situation for America?
Well, he's absolutely convinced that they don't treat us fairly, certainly with autos and other items. You remember last time they came over, made some concessions to us on oil and especially natural gas. I think we've already maxed out after the Russia invasion of Ukraine, the natural gas. So it's going to be tough to figure out immediately how the EU can meet our demands to lessen the trade deficit between our two blocks, if you will. And so I think it's going to be tricky going forward. But they're ready, too. Everyone saw the movie last time, and they're ready for retaliation.
I'd like to ask you about another foreign policy issue we're watching today, which is Elon Musk, in his new role at the Department of Government Efficiency, pushing now for the complete dismantling of USAID. And Democratic senators held a press conference about this today. Here's what Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen had to say about the implications.
This effort by Elon Musk and so-called DOGE to shut down the Agency for International Development is an absolute gift to our adversaries, to Russia, to China, to Iran and others, because AID is an essential instrument of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. national security. This has nothing to do with making the U.S. government more efficient and everything to do with aiding and abetting our adversaries around the world.
So USAID is now getting folded into the State Department. Marco Rubio, I guess, is going to be delegating a review of this. But what's your take on this?
So a lot of foreign policy experts for years have said, why is our aid mechanism all out by itself and not under the State Department? And I think that's a fair question, and we ought to figure out the right answer, because ultimately, if we want to give foreign assistance to other nations, we probably want the State Department diplomats able to have that leverage against foreign countries. But I think what's going on here, obviously, is a debate about the priorities in our foreign policy realm. There are probably things that the USAID does that would not be acceptable broadly to the American people. I think it'll definitely be the task of the DOJ going forward to root out what those are. But ultimately, to me, it's going to be Marco Rubio who has to begin to negotiate between the sides, the DOJ, maybe bring a lot of these issues up to the president and say some of these things need to be preserved because they increase American strength and influence around the globe. Yeah. And many of these other things, some of the things you saw the White House press secretary bring out today, are probably and should be zeroed out.
Marco Rubio is going to have an interesting job in the coming months as we consider all of this. Just quickly, with our remaining time, Benjamin Netanyahu is in town tomorrow. Speaking of the Secretary of State, will he negotiate a Phase 2 peace deal while he's here?
I think he's going to have to talk to the president about this. The president's been absolutely resolute. You better not let this deal go by the wayside. I want the hostages released. I want this issue moved off of my plate. To me, the sleeper issue is, what is Netanyahu going to ask of Trump on bombing Iran? Iran is uniquely vulnerable right now because of the collapse of Syria, the collapse of Hezbollah, and all of the destruction of all the Hezbollah arms and radars going across Syria and into Iran. So they're uniquely vulnerable. And it may be that Netanyahu says, Mr. President, this is a unique opportunity for us to knock them out of the box and degrade their nuclear program. So that's going to be the big issue, I think. The sleeper issue discussed tomorrow.
All right, we'll be watching for it. Michael Allen, Managing Director and Partner at Beacon Global Strategies, thank you so much for joining us. Now, the Canadian dollar is rebounding following President Trump's confirmation that tariffs will be delayed for a month on the nation. We saw a lot of rebounding and repositioning in the market today. In fact, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick was tracking it all and is here with a breakdown on the moves. Romaine, talk about some Monday whiplash.
Yeah, that might be an understatement, Kaylee. I mean, it's really not just about the losses in the market, but really the volatility from in between. We opened up the day, and it looked like the S&P was going to end the day down about 2%. It ended the day only down about 0.8%. But in between all that, we had one of the most volatile sessions that we've seen in quite some time. Some of the gauges that measure volatility, like the VIX, that top 20, some of the gauges on currencies. Also, you mentioned the Canadian loonie, and I just want to point out that the volatility, meaning the highest price on the day versus the lowest price on the day and everything in between, that was the widest gap that we've seen going all the way back to 2022. And for the Mexican peso, similar volatility, the widest gap that we've seen going back to August of last year. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that investors really aren't certain whether Trump is actually going to make good on some of these threats. Remember, we came into today with the expectation we were getting 25 on Canada, 25 on Mexico, and 10 on China. As of right now, based on Bloomberg headlines, we know that Mexico and Canada have a reprieve for at least 1 month. But then what happens, Kaylee, after that 1 month is up?
Remarkable turnaround in crypto as well, Romaine. We saw Bitcoin specifically rally 9% off the lows today. How do we characterize this? Is this a hedge against tech, or is it tech?
I think it's a little bit of a safe haven status. A lot of people would argue that this is what crypto was supposed to be. When you look at what people were gravitating to for safety, they weren't actually buying U.S. bonds, which is normally what the play would be. They were piling into the dollar. And yeah, as you noticed, they were piling into crypto. Now, it's hard to know exactly why, but that is where most of the buying was today, Joe. And maybe that's a reflection of this idea that, you know, we always have the saying that you don't fight the Fed. We're kind of in this new era where you don't fight the White House, or at least you don't fight Trump. If Trump says, I'm going left, you better go with him, or you're going to lose a lot of money.
Welcome to our new reality on Wall Street with the help of Romaine Bostick. Romaine, it's great to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much. Coming up on Balance of Power, a look at the impact of tariffs on U.S.-China trade relations. We're going to spend some time with Anna Ashton, the founder of Ashton Analytics, former intelligence officer for the Department of Defense, as more unfolds here with regard to tariffs. A month delay for Canada and Mexico, but not for China. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
President Trump is a bully for U.S. interests. And there's no way you could look at China and see some of the things they've done where trade has been very unfair. They flaunt environmental rules, child labor rules. Some countries certainly respect a more aggressive, tough approach. And the fact that right now we're dealing with our trading partners in such a way is going to set the table for maximal leverage against China. And at that point, when it comes, it won't look as aggressive, but in fact it will, because things need to change.
Joe Lafornia, the former chief economist, the White House National Economic Council in the first Trump administration, speaking earlier today on Bloomberg. With us now, a specialist on U.S.-China trade relations, Anna Ashton, founder of Ashton Analytics and former intelligence officer for the Defense Department. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio, Anna. It's great to have you. So Canada's off the hook for a month. Mexico's off the hook for a month. What could China do to make the same arrangement? He says, the president says he'll be talking with China in the next 24 hours.
You know, I think the real question is, will China do anything to try to make the same arrangement? It's a different cost-benefit analysis from Beijing's standpoint. They're already under significant tariffs that have been in place for, the entirety of the Biden administration and at least half of the Trump administration's first round now. And this is an increase in the tariffs that have been placed on their imports, but it's not it's not the same magnitude of change as what Canada and Mexico were potentially facing.
Well, so is it really just that China would rather face higher tariffs potentially than stem the flow of fentanyl? Because Donald Trump says that's really what this is about, that this is not a trade war, to use the words of those in his administration, but a drug war. China has no interest in trying to address the drug side of this equation.
Right. And Kayleigh, that's the interesting thing, is that, actually China reached an agreement. When President Biden and President Xi met on the sidelines of met in San Francisco last fall, fall of 2023, and had some deliverables. One of the deliverables was that the U.S. would remove sanctions on this part of their Ministry of Public Security that had been leading the effort to crack down on any sort of illicit shipments. And in return, they would get that part of the ministry back up and running and working on that very issue, trying to stop illicit shipments to the United States, not only of fentanyl, but also of, fentanyl precursors that may have, end users who are intending to make fentanyl with them. From the Chinese perspective, certainly what I was hearing in Beijing earlier this month is that they have seen the data regarding the U.S. fentanyl situation has been improving, but they haven't heard anything from Washington attributing it to their efforts to step up cooperation. So I think they already feel like they've been cooperating. They also feel like this isn't actually their problem to solve. This is a U.S. domestic problem. And they feel like they're not getting credit when they do try to help.
Well, it sounds like Donald Trump might get credit for some of the progress that the Biden administration made on fentanyl. Is that your point?
It's certainly possible. I mean, I guess, every new president can benefit from whatever favorable conditions exist when they come in the door. And the fentanyl epidemic has shown some slight improvement in recent months.
Well, so if we consider the kind of wider picture here on U.S.-China relations under Donald Trump, Anna, what exactly should we be bracing for in terms of volatility in this relationship? As he, on the campaign trail, was talking about 60% tariffs on China. Now what it looks set to go into effect at midnight is just 10. Does that mean that there's only really room for things to get worse, potentially?
I don't think so. I think that, when he was on the campaign trail, he certainly said some inflammatory things regarding what he might do in the U.S.-China policy. But at the same time, his talk about tariffs and trade more frequently emphasized closer U.S. trading partners, geographically closer U.S. trading partners, Western trading partners, developed country trading partners, as opposed to China. There was a marked difference between his China rhetoric during the 2016 campaign and the China rhetoric this time around. He did invite President Xi to attend his inauguration. The Chinese government did send someone to be Xi's representative. I think both sides would like there to be a degree of stability, and it is certainly possible that they can achieve that, or at least prevent things from getting worse. But this approach by the Trump administration, right out of the gate, is probably not going to go over well in Beijing. Although they have pulled their punches so far, they really haven't taken any significant retaliatory action or indicated that they will, other than filing a complaint at the WTO, which is pretty symbolic.
Yeah. Well, Anna, China was certainly watching. Beijing was watching as Secretary of State Marco Rubio made his way to Panama over the weekend. Of course, this had a lot to do with the Panama Canal and, yes, China, as the country has now agreed to pull out of the Belt and Road Initiative. Here's the Secretary of State.
We turned over the canal, we turned it over to Panama. We didn't turn it over to China. So you get there, and the Chinese control both entries to the port. Both entries to the port. We have a treaty obligation to protect the canal if it comes under attack, but our Navy is paying fees to go through there. I understand that it's a delicate issue in Panama. We don't want to have a hostile or negative relationship with Panama. I don't believe we do. But we had a frank and respectful conversation, and I hope it'll yield fruits and results in the days to come.
We spent a lot of time talking about tariffs today, Anna. The significance of this development in Panama means what to you?
Well, I certainly think that this is something that is easier for Beijing to digest in terms of the geopolitical significance of it and the strategic complaint on the part of the U.S. Furthermore, Panama certainly isn't Beijing's only option when it comes to ports in the region. They've just opened a huge port in cooperation with Peru. So do they really need to use Panama? Do they really need to have Panama as a significant participant in the Belt and Road Initiative? I wouldn't expect this to be the thing that upsets the apple cart in the U.S.-China relationship. And I think that it is a much easier complaint to understand when it comes to assessing U.S. interests and where the U.S. is coming from in its aggressive postures.
All right, Anna Ashton, founder of Ashton Analytics, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up, we'll get our political panel's perspective on Trump's tariff tactics. Jeannie Shanzano and Lisa Camusa-Miller join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Tariffs are very powerful, both economically and in getting everything else you want. Tariffs for us, nobody can compete with us because we're the pot of gold. But if we don't keep winning and keep doing well, we won't be the pot of gold, and then tariffs won't be so good for us. But when you're the pot of gold, the tariffs are very good. They're very powerful.
That was President Trump earlier today in the Oval Office. And the threat of tariffs do seem to have gotten him at least some things he wanted, with Mexico and Canada agreeing to measures to stem the flow of fentanyl and migrants over their borders in exchange for a month-long delay in 25% import levies. Joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is this evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Lisa Camusa-Miller, Republican strategist and host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Welcome to you both. Lisa, you do have to ask the question of what this is all really about and whether or not Donald Trump just wanted to say, hey, look what I got them to do with this threat.
Yes, I think that that's exactly how he's going to message it, too. I mean, when you think about the audiences that he's communicating with, those folks that he's talking to on Truth Social and these other outlets that are covering and covering him favorably, that's precisely what they're going to say. They're going to say that they did exactly what they were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And now we wait to see. We wait to see what happens in those 30 days.
So is the takeaway here, Jeannie, that tariffs work? Or that the threat of tariffs work, because implementing them would clearly have economic impacts that it appears we're not going to have to worry about, at least with Canada and Mexico?
You know, my view of this is that we should pay attention to what all economists tell us, which is that not only are tariffs damaging to the economy, and in this case, if they're implemented, of course, but using them as a negotiating strategy is, if you listen to people who study international relations, also dangerous. Because what it does is it removes your ability to yield and work with soft power. And that matters. So I think in the short term, he is going to say, look at what we won here. But the long-term damage to the United States by bullying its allies and friends is something that we all should be mindful of. Moreover, if our real competitor is China, how does he explain 10 on China and 25 on our closest neighbors, friends, democratic allies? So it's perplexing. It is from my view, it is not something that they should be doing. And by the way, all presidents could have done it. They choose not to because hopefully they have more of a long view as to what is going on.
But not all presidents campaign on these issues in the way that Donald Trump did. Jeannie, can we really say that he did anything with these threats or trying to address the border issue that he didn't promise to do on the campaign trail?
No, he absolutely promised. You know, I went back 1986, 87. He has a full-page ad in the New York Times saying if he runs in 88, he's going to do this. This is a long-term commitment of Donald Trump's. But that doesn't make it good for U.S. foreign policy, international relations, or the economy.
So just broadly speaking, you've been a Republican for a minute, and until pretty recently, tariff was a swear word. Now Donald Trump says it's his favorite word in the dictionary. Is the Republican Party now going to have religion when it comes to tariffs? You just saw it work, right?
Well, I mean, this is an outlier in terms of examples, and I certainly think that Republicans are going to find it difficult to say anything other than tariffs are a strategy, a longer-term strategy for the president. But look, any economist will tell you that tariffs are still taxes, right? And the taxes and the pinch really comes to the middle class. And so the words that I really saw this week that I feel like are the ones that maybe the president needs to reconsider is the fact that it could have some near-term impact, because the only people that are going to be paying are people like all of us, and not necessarily him and his friend Elon Musk and those that are at the White House. And that, I think, is where the real difficulty comes, because it's those people that were really counting on him to do the right thing. If they start to feel that at home when it comes to their household budgets and other places, that's, I think, we're going to find people are going to be really unhappy with the way that this strategy has been deployed.
Well, so as we think about this through the lens of taxes, maybe they're unhappy if they're having to pay more because of higher tariffs, but maybe their tax rate's going to go down. At least that's what Donald Trump has also argued, that tariffs are a way to supplement lost revenue from lower taxes. Can he have both, Lisa, if he's using it as leverage, therefore they're not going to into effect, but it's also supposed to help with the math on this ultimate tax package?
You know, Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 are two very different things. But the one thing, I think, the point that Jeannie made is that we actually are seeing exactly the way Donald Trump has conducted business over time. What others have said is not conventional and not the way to do it is precisely how Donald Trump has amassed his real estate footprint, and he's done all of the things that he's done in a way that is not necessarily conventional. So as much as I'm following those words that you're hearing from the president as well, Kayleigh, I'm not so sure that a traditional economist would agree.
Fact of the matter is Joe Biden kept the Trump-China tariffs in place for 4 years, Jeannie. So are they both pro-tariff?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to conclude that. The reality is once you get tariffs in place, they don't come off so easily. And that was one of the things that a lot of us asked about Joe Biden. Where is the sunlight between his policy towards China and Donald Trump's? And there wasn't much as it pertained to tariffs. You know, the reality with Donald Trump is his world vision is that there are winners and there are losers. Adam Smith told us in The Wealth of Nations a long time ago, trade can be a win-win. Donald Trump ideologically rejects that notion. He sees everything as win and loss. And so that is how he is going to run the country. That's certainly what people voted for, but it doesn't make it good for the long-term health of the U.S. economy or our relationship around the world. By the way, our ability to confront the autocrats and the communist dictators in China.
Well, it's one thing how Donald Trump views things. It's another how the people around him do. He said today, at least in the case of Mexico, in this month-long interim period, there's going to be negotiations led by Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent, and Howard Lutnick. How will those individuals ultimately influence the way trade policy moves forward?
Well, I mean, each one of them has a piece of the trade portfolio, right? And so that alone is probably what the president was referring to, because you have the trade rep, you have USTR, you have all these various offices that have that responsibility, Department of State obviously included in that. And the three of them together will charge in the way forward, the way the president wants them to.
So they won't be a check.
But I'm not sure they're going to be a check, but they certainly have power to negotiate on behalf of the president. And I would suspect that based on who they are and the way that they have performed and the words that they've used to support the president, that they're going to advance the policies that the president and the White House want to see in place.
You know, it's interesting, Kayleigh, when you look at Donald Trump's truth on the Canada agreement, he says the tariffs announced Saturday will be paused to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Are we going to have some sort of summit here at the end of February?
That's a really good question.
We'll stay tuned. We have news on something else that the president's going to be up to tomorrow. As we turn our attention to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, now in charge of USAID, and Elon Musk pushing for a dismantling of the agency. Our panel will have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There are things that USAID, that we do through USAID, that we should continue to do, and we will continue to do. But everything they do has to be in alignment with the national interest in the foreign policy of the United States. And the attitude that USAID has adopted over the years is, no, we are independent of the national interest. We fund programs irrespective of whether it's aligned or not aligned with the foreign policy. That's ridiculous.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio in El Salvador today, right after it was announced that he is now the acting director of USAID. Back with us, our political panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Lisa Camuso-Miller. Jeannie, this all came about from some concerns that Elon Musk had about the agency, and here we are with workers told to stay home today. It's now been folded into the State Department or the Secretary of State's purview. What does this mean for the recipients of that aid?
You know, I don't think we know. And you know, I'm just thinking, poor Marco Rubio, he didn't have enough on his plate. Now he's running USAID. Yeah, right. But, you know, the reality is that they have absolutely every right to look at what USAID is funding, to clean it up, to make it more efficient and effective. He is absolutely right on that. I think the troubling part of this is Elon Musk getting on to his X account and talking about how people working in that agency are criminals, and it's, you know, without offering any evidence. He doesn't have, as far as we know, he hasn't gone through any Senate confirmation or hearing. So some of this is troubling from that perspective. But yeah, we can certainly do a better job with all of these government programs. We want that, but it has to go through proper channels and not be debated about by Elon Musk on X.
Well, and Elon Musk now has access to Treasury payment systems to decide whether or not funding actually makes it to where they're intended to go. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, confirmed today, Lisa, that Elon Musk is now a special government employee. Does he need to have some kind of oversight over him?
I mean, yes.
Will that happen?
But that will not happen. Who's going to authorize it? Who's going to ask for it? I think the greater part of all of this is that the way the White House sees this, the way they see all of this, is that they were given direction by the voters, that they wanted change and they wanted things to be done differently. And so they have the president has decided that Elon Musk is the man to do it. The president must have been impressed with the way he took down Twitter, because that's precisely the way he's taking down the different foundations of the federal government as it relates to USAID and some of the others. It's not out of the question that Marco Rubio would be acting director while they wait to confirm someone to USAID, because USAID does live in the U.S. Department of State. But all of those people that are out and about and giving and providing funding through that program should be aligned with the government and the way the government's moving. But it has never been done that way before. And so that's why I think the White House feels empowered, because they're saying it's time to change the way things are done.
So, Jeannie, if you're Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries, why not demand that Elon Musk be brought to Capitol Hill for a confirmation hearing if you want a single Democratic vote on reconciliation?
Oh, I think they're going to make that demand. They absolutely should. But the reality is they're in the minority, and nothing is going to happen until Republicans in the majority move forward and make that case, or this is stopped by the courts, as it may be. The reality is Donald Trump is acting like he has, a 60-man majority, woman majority in the House and, 12 seats in the Senate. He doesn't. And he's moving fast because he knows it's only a matter of time till the first branch stands up and says, we have the constitutional ability to stop you. And we are the first branch of government, and we control the purse, which is the reality of separation of powers in the Madisonian system.
In our final minute here, Lisa, looking ahead to tomorrow, President Trump is going to be having his first foreign leader visiting the White House. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, and CBS is reporting that there will be a press conference with the two of them. What is Trump looking for to come out of this meeting?
I mean, I have every expectation that they'll do everything differently than the former administration. He wants this to look entirely different from the way that Joe Biden handled this. He's unhappy with that. He's heard that from voters. He's been out on the stump, obviously, up until just a few weeks ago. The president is eager and anxious and seeking an opportunity to do things differently, and that's why he's going to make sure that his conversation is out loud with a press conference with the opportunity to talk to Netanyahu.
Jeannie, does this visit make it easier or more difficult to reach phase 2 of the ceasefire with Hamas?
Well, let's hope it makes it easier. I don't know if anything's easier in that context, and I think this is very much where Donald Trump sees his legacy. In Israel, he wants to expand to the wins he got on the Abraham Accord, and I think that he's going to be working very hard to do that from a legacy perspective. And tomorrow is going to be fascinating when they meet.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Lisa Camuso-Miller, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much. Of course, we're going to have coverage of that fully tomorrow live here from Washington, in addition to everything else. You know what we didn't even mention tonight, Joe? The creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund that Donald Trump announced today. Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick going to head that up. I didn't think countries with trillions of dollars in debt did that kind of thing.
How else are you going to get the TikTok deal? I thought you were going to say that was Puxatawny Phil. We haven't mentioned Groundhog Day.
Did he see his shadow?
We're going to stay cold for a while. See you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.